Chapter 24 of Arrest Part 2.
I saw you touch it, Midnight. It responded to you. Cease this at once! I refuse to suffer your imbecilic attempts at tricking me!
Twilight groaned out loud, thankful that the whipping of the wind kept anyone else from noticing. They were descending the central spire, escorted by Ametrine, Serene Agate, and a trio of aides she had yet to be acquainted with, making back for the tower she now knew as the South Face. She'd been doing her best to appear composed, friendly, and confident during the walk, but the task was made somewhat difficult by Midnight's constant assertion that she hadn't touched the black crystal.
I know what you're thinking, you know. It doesn't matter if you voice it or not. Oh, be quiet!
Twilight rounded on her other half, who was busily floating in the open air just off the path with a petulant glare.
I'm not trying to trick you. As much as you talk about never lying to me, maybe you could take your own advice for once, look in my head, and see that I'm not lying to you!
Midnight's lip curled back. They held each other's gaze for a few moments. Finally, Midnight scoffed and looked away.
I know.
Twilight blinked.
Then what in Celestia's name are we arguing about? We're arguing because I'm...
Midnight growled, a low, guttural hiss so loud in Twilight's ears that she nearly tripped in shock.
I was not in control! The infernal crystal muddled me, and I wasn't aware of my actions until it was done!
She disappeared from Twilight's sight, voice taking on a slight shiver.
Does that please you? Let me be.
Twilight's jaw dropped. Midnight was gone. She had sealed herself up in the shadows that lurked at the bottom of Twilight's mind. The dark, slithering tingle that Twilight had felt stretching out to her hoof tips ever since Alta Lucia had receded, fading into memory. Twilight's first instinct was to wonder when it would be back. Her second was revulsion at the first, followed shortly by confusion. Shouldn't she be happy? This was what she had wanted ever since she struck that terrible bargain with Midnight, wasn't it? To have her body back. To be free to do whatever she wanted without that sneering voice in her head. To be able to close her eyes without seeing that slitted gaze staring back at her. But no. She felt empty. She felt like she had as a filly when her big brother had gone off to boot camp, leaving a quiet, empty room next to hers with a closed door that she walked past every morning. She felt like a pony sitting alone at a table for two, and she kept looking up expectantly, glancing out the window, stomach churning with concern for the pony that was supposed to be sitting with her.
I've lost my mind.
Twilight shook her head, trying to focus on the steps.
She's finally broken me. I finally got what I've been asking for, and all I can think about is whether or not she's okay.
Her ears drooped as she willed herself to be happy, to imagine running back to her friends and announcing that she'd finally locked Midnight away once more and would never risk letting her out again.
Midnight?
She whispered the word under her breath, and only the wind answered back. Serene came to a stop in front of her, and with a start, Twilight realized that they had reached the bridge leading back to the South Face. He raised a hoof towards Ametrine, who took it with a gracious smile, and together they stepped off the firm crystal and onto the swaying bridge of bone. Twilight took a deep breath as she followed.
Midnight will be fine.
She was strong-spirited, maybe even too much, and probably just frustrated. Twilight snorted as she had the sudden mental image of a snarling Midnight stomping off to her room and slamming the door shut, like a sulking teenager. And then her smile faded as she remembered what Midnight's room looked like. An empty cell in a ghostly recreation of Gava's ship, haunted by eerie song. There was nothing she could do about it now, though. She would give Midnight her privacy. Till then, she had her own friends to catch up with, and a wealth of notes to review. She was sure Dusty Tome would be excited to go over some of her discoveries. Following Serene and Ametrine off the far side of the bridge and into the warm glow of the south face interior, Twilight couldn't help but smile at what she saw below. Rainbow and Applejack were seated in the middle of a throng of foals, helmets off to reveal genuine smiles. Rainbow had her hooves and wings spread wide in a pose that Twilight recognized well, and she shook her head as she realized that the Pegasus was recounting the story of her first sonic rainboom, the gathered foals leaning forwards to hang on her every word. A flick of her mane and her trademark grin marked the end of the tale, her young audience all stomping their hooves in amazement before breaking out into a flood of questions. Ametrine pulled her hoof from Serene's grip, leading the way down the ramp and onto the main floor. Several crystal ponies approached her, bowing their heads in greeting, and she smiled as the group of foals left Rainbow and Applejack to bound around her legs, each competing to be the first to share the new story.
"We are favored by the east snow today, my children,"
Ametrine said, each of the foals falling quiet to listen. She lowered her head to speak to them, but raised her voice so that the gathered adults would be able to hear her clearly as well.
"This is Twilight Sparkle, an equestrian blessed by the Shaper in a way I have never seen before, and we must help her make her descent. Do you know what that means?"
A young colt gasped.
"A hunt! And a feast!"
Another, thicker colt added. A filly with a ribbon in her mane fluttered her wings excitedly.
"In stories!" "That's right. Run along and tell your parents for me, please."
Ametrine nodded as she straightened, looking now to the adults.
"We'll set out with the dawn."
The crowd cleared quickly, adults splitting off into pairs and trios that trotted off to make preparations, while the foals each raced for different tents calling for their parents. Rainbow and Applejack were left waiting a respectful distance away, and Twilight shot them a quick smile before turning to say goodbye to Ametrine.
"You're very generous,"
she said, bowing like she'd seen the other villagers do.
"Should I be here for the hunt in the morning?"
Ametrine shook her head.
"You honor us most by accepting our gifts. Serene will provide beds for you and your companions." "Thank you, but that won't be necessary."
Twilight smiled, hoping Ametrine wouldn't be offended.
"I have my own room on our ship." "Huh. I see."
Ametrine dipped her head.
"I shall leave you then. If you need anything, bed, food, or counsel, please, let us provide it."
Taking a few steps back, she raised her head and turned away, leaving Twilight with her friends.
"Back already, Twi?"
Rainbow gave her a friendly bump.
"We figured you'd be gone longer."
Applejack rolled her eyes.
"Don't listen to that one, Nun. She was about ready to chew the walls till them foals distracted her."
"Hey, I was just making sure they didn't, eat you or something."
Twilight smirked, warmed by the duo's familiar antics.
"Where are Saber and Trails? We can catch up back on the ship."
About that,"
Applejack began.
"They already left."
Rainbow shrugged, looking away.
"Saber didn't feel safe."
Twilight cocked her head. It was understandable that Sea Saber might feel threatened in a village full of obvious meat-eaters, but it was unlike her to leave anyone behind like that. Even in Canterlot, when she had barely known them, she had refused to abandon them to the monstrous changelings haunting the city.
"She left without you?"
Rainbow grimaced.
She wanted us to come, but, we were waiting for you, so...
Twilight's brow furrowed. Rainbow was hiding something from her. She looked to Applejack and received a guilty shrug in response.
I can teleport us back aboard. Come on.
She trotted between her friends, making for the great door that led to their landing zone.
Do you still have tea in supply? I'd love to catch up over some hot tea. Yeah.
Rainbow grinned weakly, her and Applejack following on Twilight's left.
That'd be sweet.
The snow was clearing when they stepped outside, giving Twilight a clear view of the snowy landscape. Smooth, glossy ice surrounded the tower, catching the warm rays of sunset and channeling it into a gleaming white river of light that scattered into little tributaries on impact with the tower base. Further out, the ice was hidden beneath a layer of lumpy snow, the barrier between the realms forming a perfect circle centered on the crystal spire. And past all that, marked by the pale white frost drifting off their peaks like banners in the wind, were the protruding caps of mountains brought low by the floods, once towering lords of geography, reduced to petty scattered islands. Twilight paused, drinking it in. She had spent so long on the ocean floor, or even to her mutated vision, the world all faded to a dead and featureless gray, broken only by the faint shadows that hinted at the drowned corpses of old equestrian villages and townships. The ridged and snow-flurried horizon of the frozen north seemed a beautiful splash of color by comparison. And Twilight hoped that Midnight, even secluded as she was, could somehow catch at least a glimpse of it. Movement caught her eye, and the moment was gone. The Argo drifted lazily over one of the rocky islands, its envelope marred by long, slender rips, and its hull already stained white with frost. She sent out a ping to gauge the distance before preparing a teleportation spell.
Stay still!
She called to her friends beside her.
You might feel a little disoriented.
If they had any reaction to her warning, it was lost in the lavender flash of magic. Her weight shifted, and a moment later she and her friends appeared in the ship's cargo hold, bringing with them a light swirl of snow.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Rainbow stumbled to one side.
Oh, that felt freaky.
Twilight smiled.
Sorry, I'm mostly just used to teleporting myself.
She looked around, stretching her neck.
So, how about that tea?
Some minutes, and a brief fuss with the stovetop later, the three mares were all gathered in Applejack's makeshift bedroom, arranged in a rough triangle. Twilight and Applejack reclined on opposite ends of the bed, the former holding her warm tea close to her chest, while the latter nursed a mug of cider. Rainbow, also with cider, stretched out on Applejack's desktop, tail flicking nervously over her hind legs.
So, do you want to go first, Twi?
She asked, offering a hopeful smile.
We've all been wondering what you've been up to down there. I don't know. I've spent a long time with only my own voice to listen to.
She paused, half hoping that Midnight would appear to take a jab at her, but to no avail.
I think I'd like to listen at least for a little bit. Did you have any trouble getting north?
Her question was met with a pregnant silence. Twilight looked from Rainbow to Applejack, watching them have some kind of silent exchange. Finally, Applejack spoke.
Yeah. I guess y'all could say we did.
She grimaced. looking down at her drink.
Changeling snuck aboard when we left Canterlot.
Twilight gasped.
Did anyone get hurt?
Another pause. This time it was Rainbow that spoke, her voice slow and distracted.
It got Dusty. Got him?
Twilight frowned, looking between her friends. A sense of dread crept up her spine.
Is he okay?
Applejack sighed.
He was dead when we found him. Bled out on the floor of his clinic.
Twilight blinked.
Dead?
She shook her head, eyes wide. She hadn't exactly curated friendships with any of Sea Saber's crew during her time aboard. She'd even neglected her own friends during her long hours of research, but she had known Dusty better than any of them. They had shared several meals together, discussing their respective worlds, exchanging notes and theories. And she recalled him once talking about taking her to Sanctifrax, the Academy Island where he had received his education. She still had the note cards from their first proper conversation, before she had even seen Highton.
Don't worry.
Rainbow's voice came out in a dark growl.
I killed it.
Twilight's ears flicked back, a shiver passing through her at the anger in Rainbow's voice. She sounded almost like Midnight talking about Gatha, listing off the myriad imagined punishments she planned to unleash if they ever captured the cruel griffin. Twilight knew that Rainbow was still processing her anger over the loss of her eye, but she had never expected to hear anything like that, spoken in a voice normally crowing boasts or challenges between good-natured laughter. The words hung in the air for a long moment, each mare lost in their own thoughts, before Twilight broke the silence.
Is that why things feel so different with Saber?
Rainbow's ears drooped. Applejack pursed her lips.
Girls?
Twilight felt like she was back in the vault beneath Stalliongrad, dread building with every door she opened. Except instead of skeletons and portraits of the long dead, now she was coming upon something far worse.
What is it?
Tell her, Artie,
Applejack said. It sounded almost like a threat.
I will,
Rainbow snapped.
I'm just getting the words right.
Twilight waited with bated breath. What had happened to her friends while she was gone? Was it her fault for asking them to follow her north? Maybe she should have spurned them in Canterlot, delivered a second, more forceful warning not to follow her so she could unravel the mysteries of the ocean on her own, assured in the knowledge that they were safe. Maybe it had been a moment of weakness. Maybe the best thing for her friends was to simply not be her friends. Finally, Rainbow spoke.
There was a stallion, she began. Prince Silverblood.
She curled her lip as if the name carried a bad taste.
I don't know why he was a prince. We needed repairs after the Changeling, and he had a ship that could help. Spent a few days on it. It was big. There were hundreds of ponies living on it. And he kept trying to make me and Applejack sign on with him. He wanted to trap us. Followed us around like a collector looking to buy new toys. And he didn't care how much we said no. He just kept offering more.
Applejack cleared her throat.
had a smell like Flim and Flam. Except at least they cared about each other.
Rainbow nodded.
It was a relief when we finally left. I was afraid I might explode if I had to deal with him any longer. Then, Trails mentioned that she had connected him to one of the bounties put on us.
Rainbow's brow furrowed, and her tail flicked behind her. She looked up, jaw clenched in a snarl, and her one Ceres eye was burning with sudden fire.
It was his fault, Twilight. Everything with Gava, my eye, Applejack's capture, all that bloodshed on all Talusha, even you. All because of monsters like him!
The fire had spread to her voice. Twilight could see it burning in Rainbow's chest, making her hooves shake with fury.
And he laughed in my face!
Twilight's stomach knotted. She slid off the bed, stepping closer to embrace her friend.
Rainbow, no!
Rainbow stood up sharply, flaring her wings to drive Twilight back.
I didn't mean for any of it to happen, but I don't regret it either. He hurt you. He hurt all of us. And he thought he'd gotten away with it. I gave him a chance to explain himself, and you know what he said.
She shook her head, stomping hard enough to dent the metal desk she stood on.
He said it was our fault! Oh, Rainbow.
Twilight's lip quivered. It wasn't enough that almost everyone she loved had died. Now she had to watch her friends get twisted too?
What did you do? I killed him.
Rainbow looked Twilight in the eye as she said it, the fire giving way to steel.
I stomped him into the floor of his own ship. I made it right. I was the only one that could. And that's why...
Rainbow nodded.
Saber hates me now. All of Equestria thinks I was part of her crew. There'll be bounty hunters after her. Her contract with Crazy is done.
She held Twilight's gaze. Nostrils flared, an unspoken dare for Twilight to condemn her. And Twilight felt frozen in place. It was just like with Midnight, wasn't it? Rainbow would do anything to protect her friends. And after learning the identity of a pony that caused them so much grief for such petty causes, surely it would have been torture for her to just walk away. Monster. It was a word that Midnight used often, one that Twilight knew carried a heavy meaning. A monster wasn't defined by sharp fangs or slitted eyes, bloody tears or fearsome spines. It was about actions. A monster was something that threatened your friends. It was something to be stopped immediately, at any cost, once and for all. You didn't leave a monster breathing, because it would never stop chasing you or the ones you loved. What would Twilight have done if she had been in the same situation, face to face with a pony-shaped monster that hid behind its smile? She knew what Midnight would say, but Twilight wasn't sure if she'd argue. Rainbow licked her lips, her eye watering.
Do you hate me too? No.
Twilight shook her head, reaching up to lay her hoof softly on Rainbow's. She didn't smile, but she didn't need to.
I understand, Rainbow. Thank you.
Rainbow slumped down like a puppet with her strings cut, every tensed limb suddenly giving out as she let out a held breath. A second later, she spread her wings, looking away.
Sorry.
She took off without looking back, leaving Twilight alone with Applejack. The sound of the cargo room door hissing marked her departure deeper into the ship. Applejack sighed.
She's probably off for another fly. Clears her head, you know.
Yeah.
Twilight spent a long moment looking after the Pegasus.
Do you think it's my fault? For asking you to follow me?
Tartarus, Twilight, could you sit down for 1 minute and not try to carry all of Equestria for once?
Applejack let out a dry laugh.
We're all grown mares, Sugar Cube. And if you had told us not to follow you, you would have done it anyway. Wouldn't be the first time either.
She walked up to Twilight's side, pulling her into a tight hug.
I'm just glad y'all are here, alright? It's been rough, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Twilight melted into the hug with a somber smile.
Sorry. I can't help it.
I reckon that's what we all love about each other, huh? Things we can't help.
Applejack snorted.
Either way, we're here now. Saber's rightly pissed over the mess. Nearly turned us round. Talking about using Luna as a bargaining chip to get her a new contract.
Twilight stiffened.
Why didn't she?
Believe it or not, her crew spoke against it. Mostly Star Trails, really. They had a vote. Guess it came down on the right side.
Twilight nodded, nuzzling her cheek against the soft fur of Applejack's chest.
That's some good news, at least.
So what about y'all?
Applejack asked. She stepped back to look Twilight in the eye.
I'm hoping your trip wasn't quite as eventful as ours.
Twilight smirked.
It was certainly something. I found some clues in Stalingrad about the floods that confirmed they happened 2 months after the wedding, when we were captured.
She paused, considering whether she should mention the story behind finding Scylla, but decided it was irrelevant.
I can sense something inside the central spire of this city. Whatever it is, I'm convinced that it's the key to figuring out what happened.
Applejack arched a brow.
City?
Twilight nodded.
There's a whole city under the ice, and those towers are just the upper half of the palace it's built around. It looks like there was some kind of fighting here, with powerful magic involved.
And all that nonsense about you being chosen and making some kind of descent?
The ponies here, they appear to have some kind of spiritual relationship with the corruption.
Twilight said.
I'm still hazy on the details, but I think it's not uncommon for them to fall victim to it. They send the corrupted ponies down into the spire to help some figure they call the Shaper fight the darkness.
She shrugged back at Applejack's confused expression.
They say I'm the most corrupted pony they've ever seen, and they want me to go through the ritual as well. I need to explore the spire anyway, so I see no reason to argue.
Applejack sighed, taking her hat off and running a hoof through her mane.
Uh-huh. What are we supposed to do in all this?
Twilight frowned.
I'm sorry, but it feels like this is something only I can do. Maybe you could try to ask around and learn what you can? This city was built before the floods, but I've never heard or even read about it, so maybe the ponies here can shine some light on that.
Y'all want us to make nice with a bunch of cannibal ponies that decorate their homes with hide and build huts out of bone?
Applejack grimaced.
I don't know, Twi.
Applejack, please.
Twilight grabbed her hoof, holding it in hers.
Trust me when I say that I understand how you feel about this, but eating meat doesn't make ponies bad on its own. Just look at the climate here. It's probably what they have to do to survive. Give them a chance.
Well, I guess them foals were mighty cute.
Applejack shrugged, squeezing Twilight's hoof.
I'll give it a shot. Reckon Rainbow might like helping out too.
Thank you.
Twilight smiled, pulling her friend into a quick hug.
It's good to be back.
Applejack didn't miss a beat.
It's good to have you.
With one last squeeze, Twilight pulled back and turned for the curtained door.
I think I'm going to try and get some sleep. It's been a while since I had nice beds like these.
Hopefully it ain't too soft for y'all's taste now.
Applejack smirked, waving a hoof.
Good night, Twilight.
Good night, Applejack.
Twilight grabbed her tea off the bed before leaving, taking the few steps required to make it to her own little room tucked into the corner of the cargo bay. Skillet shouted out a greeting as she entered, popping up from where she'd been waiting under the desk to brush against Twilight's legs.
Hey, you.
Twilight lifted her hoof, scratching idly at the crystal spider's chitin as she sipped at the last of her tea, and regarded the sleeping alicorn currently occupying most of her bed.
I guess I won't be getting the bed after all.
It didn't bother her much. She had grown used to sleeping on hard rock, sand, or the crushed stone of old ruins. She pulled her bedroll out of shining saddlebag, which she had left propped up by the bed, and laid it out on the floor. Scylla scuttled on without hesitation, and Twilight smiled as she set her empty teacup aside and curled up next to her. Princess Luna's gentle breathing was barely audible under the ticking of the hull. Twilight closed her eyes. Sleep eluded her. She opened her eyes with a huff and tried adjusting her position. Compared to the suffocating darkness and quiet rumble of the ocean floor, the bright, loud Argo made her feel like she was sleeping in the middle of a Kennerlaw thoroughfare. The cargo hold always had its dim overhead lights on, and though the steady tick of the hull would sometimes quicken or falter, it never fully faded. She grabbed the trailing end of the blanket off her bed and tugged it over her head, being careful not to pull it so hard that it would fall completely to the floor and leave Princess Luna exposed. And still, sleep refused her. That nagging sense of emptiness hadn't faded either. She almost missed the sensation of midnight prowling nearby, growling threateningly at any sea creature that came to investigate the little lavender bubble at the bottom of the ocean, and the unicorn curled up inside. As if on cue, there was a knock. Not a physical knock, but a mental one. A prodding from the dark place to where midnight had retreated. Firm, but not demanding. A request. And Twilight opened the connection without hesitation. Instantly, the darkness flooded back through her, filling out her limbs and wreathing her body with the warm, velvety tingle of midnight's presence. She cracked an eye open, tugging the blanket off her head. Midnight was standing in the corner, watching her with narrowed eyes. Twilight said nothing. Midnight had made it clear that she needed time to process things on her own, and Twilight didn't want to drive her away again with a misspoken word. They held each other's gaze in silence. Midnight's eyes flicked away, focusing on Skilla, and her lip curled back to reveal her fangs. Twilight's brow furrowed as she focused on her dark passenger's emotion, trying to decipher them without being too intrusive. It wasn't revulsion. Anger? No. Envy. Midnight stiffened. Her eyes snapped back to Twilight, hard and challenging. Slowly, Twilight adjusted herself, scooting over to make more space on the bedroll. A low growl came from Midnight's throat, echoing in Twilight's head. Perhaps a minute passed. At last, Midnight stood, the growl dying away, and walked closer. She dropped down onto the bedroll with an indignant huff, curling up pointedly facing away from Twilight. But gradually she relaxed, leaning back into Twilight. And Twilight's fur tingled with the strange, warm buzzing of their contact. Twilight smiled, closing her eyes. Midnight growled again, but she didn't move away. And she fell asleep shortly after.